Okay, so I just spent the past hour meditating on compassion and emptiness, etc. And I want to just share some of my insights. So, they say that we can compare emptiness to space because space has the quality of non obstruction. So all that space shows us is that there is nothing obstructing anything, which is why when we have a box, if it's full, then nothing can fit in it. But if there's space, then other stuff can fit in it because it's not obstructed. So that non-obstruction, which characterizes space, all it does is affirm itself. All it does is affirm that there is no obstruction. So the non-obstruction of space affirms that there is no obstruction. Similarly, emptiness, all it does is affirm an inherent lack of existence. So, emptiness signifies an inherent lack of existence, and all that that affirms is that there is an inherent lack of existence. It affirms nothing other than the fact that there is an inherent lack of existence. So that's how space and emptiness are alike. Because when we do understand emptiness, it doesn't affirm anything. All it does is affirm itself. And it doesn't even affirm itself because its whole purpose is to just show that there's no essential nature to anything. So then what's interesting about that is that there's this one right here. She is the mother Prajna Paramita. And they say that it is her who's at the Buddha's heart. So she is the perfection of wisdom embodied, right, in a deity in the Sambhogakaya. So they say that when you are meditating on the emptiness, on the Prajnaparamita Sutras, on the Heart Sutra, that you visualize the Buddha and you visualize her as the heart. And so I thought that was really interesting, right, because that is really taking us to a space of emptiness, to a space of negation, and negating the fact that there's any inherent existence. But what we usually think about is the heart being what shows us that existence matters, showing us that we are fundamentally meaningful and fundamentally important, right? So I think that's kind of how the heart reconciles duality, because the heart simultaneously, the heart of the Buddha is showing that emptiness is the truth, and the heart of a human is showing that compassion and love is the truth. So Jack Kornfield has a great line. He says, "Love shows us that we're everything. Wisdom shows us that we're nothing. And life happens in between." So I'll leave that there. And let's meditate for a moment. Just taking a moment to sit in stillness before we go back and analyze emptiness more fully. So now, let's go ahead and do some analysis on emptiness. So in the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva / Buddha of compassion, and that's important, right? Because the Buddha of compassion is the one who speaks the Heart Sutra. So the Buddha of compassion is the one who speaks about the inherent lack of existence that is the singular characteristic of reality. So Shariputra asks Avalokiteshvara, hey, can you explain the true nature of phenomena? Avalokiteshvara says, yes, the true nature of phenomena is emptiness. It's no birth, no death, no non-birth, no non-death, no consciousness, no body, no nothing, right? So all he does is go through and negate everything that we can think of. Every single concept, he negates it. There is no microphone, there is no camera, there is no Buddha, there is no self, right? But what he does is he then focuses in on the self, because that is the thing that we hold most close to ourselves, right? I don't think that there's anyone who believes in anything more fully than the sense of I am, right? Try to think of anything that you believe in more fully than the fact that you are, than the fact of like, this is my body, this is my life, I am Marshall, I do these things. Is there anything that you can think of that you believe more fully? I doubt it. I definitely can't. So anyway, Avalokiteshvara goes on to explain why the self is the best vehicle for understanding emptiness. So basically, the self has 5 components. There is form, which is the body. There's sensation, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. So he goes on to say that form is inherently empty. So that is, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. Sensation is empty. Perception is empty. Mental formations are empty. Consciousness is empty. So let's focus on the body, right? Let's focus on form. So we are all very, very, very certain of the fact that this is my body. This is my head. This is my hair. When I go like this, I feel myself poking my forehead. I feel myself poking my jaw, right? So I'm sure that this is my body. I am it. It is me. But then let's look for this body, right? Where is the body actually? Or is it just an emergent characteristic, an emergent phenomena that happens when a bunch of stuff comes together? So if I'm looking for where is the body, right? It's like, is this the body, right? Is my jaw the body? Is my head the body? Yes and no. It's part of the body, but it is not the body in its fullness. So the head is not the body, the heart is not the body, the arms are not the body, torso is not the body, legs are not the body, feet are not the body. They're all parts of the body. And then I heard an interesting argument where it's saying, okay, so if all these are non-body, how can we then put them together to create a body? If the arm is not the body, it's an arm. The head is not the body, it's a head, etc. How can we then group all of these things together and they come together to form a body? So we then impute body. We then place the veil of concept on this conglomeration of body parts. Right, but then we could do the same thing with everything, right? So, all right, we have the brain, we have the head, et cetera, right? But then if we look at the brain is made up of gray matter and white matter. The brain is made up of neurons, it has synapses, there's hormones and chemicals that happen in the brain that cause different things to happen. So the brain, in reality, is made up of a lot of non-brain pieces. It's made up of a lot of neurons. It's made up of white and gray matter. So how come when we take neurons and we take white matter and gray matter and we put it all together, we call it a brain? The brain does not actually exist. There is an object in my head that serves a certain purpose, right? But then I say object, that means that I'm solidifying it based on some kind of delineating factor. So I'm saying that my brain, I can say that my brain is my brain because I can distinguish it from everything else, which then means that if there is this, then there must be that. So let's do that with the brain, right? Let's say I know that this brain exists. I know that there is a brain, but the brain is connected to the spinal cord, right? That's where the brain stem is. And the spinal cord is connected to the rest of the body, right? The spinal cord relies on the heart to pump blood. It relies on the respiratory system and the lungs to disseminate oxygen so that it can continue to grow and function. It relies on the individual to bring in nutrients and sustenance so that it can continue to go. Therefore, if we have the brain, right, And we're like, okay, the brain has this barrier. This characterizes the brain. But then we realize that, well, actually, the brain is not possible without the rest of the body. It is not possible without the things that make life possible. Then we recognize that that boundary we drew around brain is actually not a boundary that we can actually draw, right? So brain in and of itself does not exist. It exists as a concept, and it exists as a small part of a much larger whole. But then to even say a small part of a much larger whole puts superficial boundaries and boxes things in and freezes it conceptually. So that definitely made sense to me. Now, let's move on to mental formations, because that's another one I've spent a lot of time thinking about. So, mental formations, right? What are they? They're essentially any formations of the mind, right? It's thoughts, essentially. It's concepts. So, let's say I have a thought about my friend, or I have a thought about the business, right? I feel very strongly like this is a thought about the business, right? It feels very solid. But the Buddha says to view all compounded phenomena more like clouds than like rocks, more like illusions than these separate self-existing entities. So I have this thought of my business, right? Source Wellness. I have the thought there. But that thought is only possible for a bunch of reasons, right? The thought is only possible because my brain is working. The thought is only possible because the body is working. The thought is only possible because I have the word source and I have the word wellness. And there are certain concepts that I associate with those two words, right? Without the word source, source wellness could not exist in this current form because the word source would not exist. The concept source might exist, but it might exist in a different way, showing you that source, the word itself, is inherently empty. It doesn't inherently mean anything. S by itself doesn't mean anything. O by itself doesn't mean anything. All letters do is represent themselves. Then from that letter, we figure out a sound to place on top of it. So you go source, okay. Now, we then put those sounds together, right? We put those letters together, we string those sounds together, and then we say, okay, this word is source. And then we put the meaning onto this word. Okay, source means the place from which things arise, right? So if it's the source of a river, it is where the water originates from. If it's the source of all life, someone might say that it's God. If it is the source of energy for my apartment, then it's Georgia Power. So source is the starting point from which things originate. So now we have the idea of source, right? But we see that source itself, the word, means nothing without all the concepts placed on top of it, without everything else placed on top of it. So we see that that formation of source wellness is actually empty. It only exists because we impute a reality upon it. It is not this solid, self-existing entity. It is this very fluid, kind of cloudy substance that just is. It's a lot more like water than it is like a solid. It's a lot more like a gas than it is like a solid. So we talked a bit about the body. We talked a bit about mental formations. Now let's talk about sensations, right? So we have our senses, we have our eyes, we have our ears, we have our mouth, we have our nose, and we can touch with the body, right? So when those sensations all come together, we feel like it is an experience, right? We are experiencing reality. But what's actually happening is I smell something, I see something, I hear something, I taste something. Those are all being registered in different parts of the brain. Of course, the brain integrates together, but there is a visual cortex. There is an audio cortex, auditory cortex. There is a place in our brain that is associated with smell and with taste and with touch. So in reality, all of these pieces of our existence are coming in. There's vibrations that are coming in and making sounds. There's these physical objects that are around, right? There's a camera that I can then touch and get some feedback from. I don't even know how smell works, but there's stuff in the air that smells, right? There is light that is reflected off of surfaces at a certain vibrational frequency that then shows us that there is a white wall here and there is a black computer monitor there, right? So those senses then all come together in the brain, and then we say, okay, I'm having an experience of reality. but each of those senses is bringing in different information. It's all being processed in the brain and then being exported as what seems like a solid entity of existence. It's not. Let's take another thing. Let's look at anger, right? Let's look at emotions. So, anger, we often think of as this very real thing. And that's why when people get angry, they feel like they have to respond to it and they feel like they have to act on it because it feels like a physical substance. So in ancient mythologies, right, they would say that there is actually a god of rage, a god of anger, a god of war, because when you are enraged, something takes over you, something acts through you. People say, I'm not myself when I'm angry, because it is that anger that is acting, it is not them who is acting necessarily, or that's how they feel, right? But in reality, anger is not this solid, self-existing entity that exists outside of ourselves as a god, right? For example, anger is actually the mutual arising of a bunch of different phenomena within and without of the body, right? So let's say I have this Buddha statue here that I love a lot, and if somebody takes it and smashes it, I will get angry, right? That anger is purely subjective. If someone who is fiercely anti-religious sees a Buddha statue get smashed, they might be happy. So right there we can see that anger does not come from the event itself. Anger comes from our interpretation and our understanding of the event. Next, we'll realize that anger, right, it arose because of my feelings about the thing. It arose because of my feelings about the situation, but those feelings happen within the body, right? There are the mental formations that come into play, there's the sensations that come into play, there's the perceptions that come into play, the consciousness that comes into play, and the physical body that comes into play. I didn't explain all of them, but those are the 5 aggregates that come together to make the self. So coming back to anger, I feel angry, right? I am angry. We identify with that anger. But what anger really is it is our blood rushing into our arms, into our extremities, because our fight or flight response has been activated. It is cortisol flooding into our body because we are stressed. It is our brain getting less oxygen and less blood flow, so we're less good at making decisions because all that energy and all that blood has flowed to the rest of our body so that we can fight or flight, right? So anger isn't actually this one self-existing thing that necessarily arises from whatever phenomena occurred externally. Just because a Buddha statue is broken by somebody doesn't mean I have to get angry. And just because I have the feelings of a stress response, I have the release of cortisol, I have that feeling of my heart beating faster and my face getting red, just because all those feelings are arising does not mean that I have to then take them, put them all together, and impute a real existence. That is anger. So no, I am not angry. There's just a bunch of phenomena that are coming together in a way that I've been conditioned to believe as anger. So if we can learn to recognize this, we can learn to let go of that very solid feeling and recognize that anger is like a cloud. And recognize that just like a cloud, it will come into being and it will go out of being. The same way that we cannot control the way that clouds come into being and come out of being, we cannot always control the way that anger comes into being and comes out of being. But we can rest assured that if it is here, eventually it will not be here, because that's impermanence, and that is just a fact of life. It's change, right? Life and change are synonymous. So oftentimes people will talk about this when you're sitting doing meditation and just watching your mind. That is the perfect way to realize the inherent nature of change in the world, as the world. So as we sit, right, we think that we have control over our minds, we think we have control over our bodies. We recognize through the lens of stillness that we really do not. So when you do sit, let's just take 10 seconds to sit and watch our thoughts. Okay, so in that amount of time, what happened was I said, I'm going to clear my mind. I'm going to not have any thoughts. Then I heard a Burna Boy song in my head. Then I thought about what I was going to be saying next. Then I remembered I wasn't supposed to be thinking, and I cleared my mind. Then I felt an itch on my neck, and I told myself, no, I'm not going to itch it. I'm just going to sit with it and be with it. Right, so within those 10 seconds, I was trying to be still, but thoughts arose. And then they went away. And then they came back, and they went away. So just watching our minds and watching our bodies, it really shows us that existence, it just comes into being and comes out of being. Even the things that we think we have the most control over, aka our mind, right? Our mind, wherever it may reside, we do not have that much control over it. But what we can learn to do is we can learn to control it to a certain degree, we can learn to love it, and we can learn to accept it. And that's where compassion comes into play, right? Particularly self-compassion, since we're talking about ourselves. The mind is a very powerful tool, and oftentimes in Buddhism in particular, it's talked about as an elephant. So an elephant, you cannot fight an elephant, right? You can work with an elephant. So if the conscious awareness is the person and the mind is the elephant, what the person has to do is they have to learn to understand what the elephant likes, understand what the elephant doesn't like, understand what motivates the elephant, understand what doesn't motivate the elephant. And if we do that all from a place of compassion, we'll recognize that when the elephant gets angry and has an outburst, maybe it's because it's frustrated. Maybe it's because its fundamental needs have not been met. Therefore, it has to lash out. So if we can look at it from this lens of compassion, then we can say, okay, there's anger, there's sadness, there's frustration. Why? Instead of saying, okay, there's anger, sadness, and frustration, that's bad. Say, okay, there's anger, frustration, and sadness. Why are they there? Let's have a compassionate attitude. Let's seek to understand before being understood, right? The Stephen Covey maxim. And so with that compassionate lens, we're seeking to understand. We're not just seeking to be understood. With that compassionate lens, we are seeking to learn to work with more skillfully. And I guess that's where I'm going to cut it.